Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michael Laufer and I have the great pleasure to welcome you to this, the last panel of the afternoon on the last day of our two-day conference. This panel is entitled Visions for the Future, and we're fortunate to have 6 visionary leaders of Reform Judaism who will compile all that we've learned over these last 2 days and share with us their visions. Because of the number of panelists and the limited time available, I will provide a brief introduction in the order that they will present, and then turn the floor over to our presenters. Our first panelist this afternoon is Rabbi Meir Azari, the senior rabbi of the Daniel Center's Tel Aviv. Second will be Rabbi Samantha Kahn, Congregation B'nai Israel, Boca, Raton. Third will be Rabbi Rachel Sabath Beit-Halachmi, Sinai-Oheb Shalom, Congregation Baltimore. Next will be Ilana Drake, a student at Vanderbilt University. Next will be Andrew Keene, the Vice Chair of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. And sixth will be Rabbi Josh Weinberg, URJ's Vice President, Israel and Reform Zionism, and the Executive Director of ARTSA. Rabbi Azari.
Shalom. Ma shlomcha? How are you? It's a question that, well, you ask this question so many times every day. And what I've learned traveling in here in America for the last 35 years is great. This is the answer that I usually get. How can you ask an Israeli those days, Ma shlomcha? What type of an answer you will get for this type of question? Ma shlomcha? Well, it's not great. Shavur, broken, tired, angry, full with frustrations. And you know what? Something new. Mefached, afraid. This is the answer that you'll get from Israelis if you push them to give you the right, the real answer. It's not great. Complicated. Then you ask the question of this panel, Ma yeh, the future. Who knows? War in Lebanon tomorrow, maybe tonight. Next round of missiles from Iran. New intifada in the territories. I discussed that West Bank, how we call it. Well, who knows? So I won't deal with that at this point, but I will try to be, what we call in Hebrew, ishi, talk from my heart. What can you do as a rabbi in this point, serving a large community in Israel? I know if I ask myself, my future, I know that in my future, my next year, I will continue to support family grieving and healing. And guys, it's very complicated, heartbreaking. I'll continue to support couples that are getting married, that postpone their wedding 2, 3, sometimes, in one case, 4 times. I will have to deal with what do you do in the ceremony, how you answer to the fact that there are 3 or 4 friends among the community that were wounded, one without leg, the other one doesn't see anymore. How can you lesameach chatan vekala, to dance and while the friend just died week before or months before? What do you say to a bride that her wedding was postponed for the 3rd time? After 5, 6 years of dreaming about that day. How can you support a congregant that's afraid for the life of their kids being in Gaza or in the north? What do you tell to a Holocaust survivor that are very much afraid to a point that you don't find the word to support her? What will happen to my grandkids that are in the army? It's very tough. I'm serving community for the last 33 years. I saw so much in my life in Israel. I remember myself once standing next to a mother that lost her mother and her daughter in a terrorist attack. I conducted the funeral and she came to me and she said, "You're the rabbi." I said, "Yes." We talked just a few hours ago. She said to me, here you have the two bodies. Which one I go first? To kiss, to hug? My mother or my daughter? The life of a rabbi in Israel is very complicated. I never dreamed that I will have to do what I do in the last few months. Try to heal and support people that came from Sderot to Mishkenot Ruth Daniel, to our guest house. People that their home was hit 3-4 times, and we, the Israelis, didn't pay attention to that. And you tell to a kid in Shabbat, the story of Shabbat, and the kid says, "I have a better one than your story." He tells you about what he saw in Sderot, how they killed a certain guy in the city. How do you react? You talk about Jewish education earlier, and the challenge of Jewish education. You understand the gap? You understand what we have went through in the last few months? That's the challenge. Jewish education. Tell to this kid, 5 years old, we just learn about the questions coming out from your kids, from your schools. How will deal with those kids in Israel that saw and experienced what they experienced, those who are not living in their places, homes, during the last 8 months? The future. The future depends, Jewish future depends in our ability to overcome those difficulties, challenges, to believe that there is a Jewish future and work to achieve that. A few years ago, I was walking in Majdanek death camp with my daughter Daphne. We're there because my wife Anna was visiting the cardinal there. She was the Israeli ambassador to Poland that time. And Daphne asked me, "Abba, what do you think the people there in the camp thought that while they were being there?" He has heard from our tour guide that people stayed there sometimes for months. I said, "Daphne, probably they thought about the next meal. None of them thought that your mother, new immigrant from Soviet Union, will be the Israeli ambassador visiting the Cardinal of Krakow or the Cardinal in that city, Lublin." I've learned during the last year and a half, so much. I know that I'm taking more than my 2 minutes here, but you allow me. I came all the way from Israel to do that. I've learned that we have a bad government. No need to talk about it. We'll change them. We'll do that soon, I hope. I've learned so much about the civil society in Israel. Part of you saw that during the last year and a half. People talk about 40 weeks, 20% of the population outside screaming, Demokratia, yes. It's not just Demokratia. What will happen since October 7, civil society, the spirit of the state of Israel, the people of Israel, will overcome anything, any difficulties that we saw. I'm so proud with the wall that we built in Israel against the evil spirit. I've learned something else. I've learned so much during the last few months about evil. Roa. I attended dozens and dozens of protests in Israel, demonstrations. In almost each one of them, I saw Vivian Silver. Almost in each one of them. The call for peace, for a Palestinian state, for better Israel, pluralism, democracy. Took to Israelis a few weeks to identify her body. She was slaughtered, October 7, to pieces. Talking about neighbors, ואהבת לרעך כמוך. This is the world that we are living in. What a challenge. I've learned about the double standard of this world as an Israeli. We usually don't talk about it. You know, the judge leading the court, judging the state of Israel today, and our leaders, I don't like them. But it comes from Lebanon. For the last 8 months, every day there are dozens and dozens of rockets coming from Lebanon to Israel. We didn't do anything to them. And he's judging us. Saudi Arabia is leading the Committee on Women issue of the United Nations. And the Secretary General of the United Nations mourned the death of the Iranian president. Just call again and again the destruction of the state of Israel. Can you imagine to yourself that? Each one of you, I presume, read the New York Times every day. I remember myself first time coming to the States. We couldn't get them, the New York Times. I'm talking about 35 years ago. I ran to buy the New York Times for the first time. That was Sunday. Oh, a huge package I got. So happy. I remember myself sitting in a coffee shop before Starbucks world started, drinking the coffee, the cheap coffee then, reading the New York Times for the first time in my life. See the numbers. Research that done by an Israeli scholar. Since the war started, Israel was criticized in 49% of the articles dealing with news. United States in 11%, Hamas 5%. Op-ed. I learned from you that the best of the best scholars and mind writes the op-ed articles in the United States on New York Times. So this is the number. 30% of the articles criticize Israel, 25% criticize the United States of America, and 10% criticize Hamas. Huh? Can you imagine to yourself 1942 or 43 or 44, this is the number, yeah? You can do better. We can do better. I can assure you that we'll do that, but there's something that we need in order to overcome the difficulties and the challenge of this era and this time. I came to the United States first time after the war in December. So cold that morning that I landed. And I had a meeting not far from here with a person that I never met, but she agreed to meet me, a donor. I never met that lady before. I came a little bit early. I sat at the Central Park, and I felt so bad. I cannot describe you the feeling, my coming from Israel with such a heavy heart. And I cried. I don't cry usually. I don't. And I went to that lady. She opened the door, and she hugged me. I feel the hug until today. I'm telling you. I felt love. And I felt what I've learned through books and newspapers, what you call Jewish solidarity. This is what we need. I saw that through the missions that came to Israel, through phone calls from rabbis and friends and your support. But as a proud Reform rabbi, I'm telling you, we and you can do better. We didn't do enough. We don't do enough. I hope that our movement, as any individual rabbi, will do better than we did in the last 8 months. Don't be just Emma Goldman, Rosa Luxemburg, and Karl Marx. All of them are Jews dealing with Tikkun Olam. It's not enough. We and you need love. You and us need Jewish solidarity. And this is the key for the Jewish future, as I understand it, from an Israeli perspective. Thank you for your support. Ami, you are here. My speech in your synagogue is longer than your speech in my synagogue in Tel Aviv. Those who didn't heard the story, Ami brought this group and a rabbi's first mission to Israel. And he started by saying, from the Bima at Beit Daniel, I feel so secure here, more than I feel in the streets of Manhattan, and then the alarm started. Ami was white, the rest of the group even probably more than him, and you ran all to the shelter, and that was the speech, probably. So thank you very much for the hospitality, and I hope to see you next time in Israel. Think Jewish solidarity and think about love. Toda.
Hello, everybody. I have to start by saying thank you to Meir for starting us off, and we hope you know that all of our hearts are with you in all of your work, and I couldn't agree more that Jewish solidarity is what is needed most for our future. And for me, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think that looks like for American Judaism. I envision our future as being grounded in a love of Israel and Jewish peoplehood. I believe this must be primary and unapologetic for our movement and her leaders. No offense to the speakers we heard before lunch, but I believe deeply that a sense of connection, of meaning, of importance, and yes, even love, can be passed down, can be instilled, and that Ahavat Yisrael should always remain a priority and a Jewish value. Additionally, I believe our universal values must always be rooted in our particularism, and I think these messages call out to me from the questions of the great Rabbi Hillel, you know these words, im ena nili mili. If we do not support and defend ourselves as Jews, who will? Yes, others also have needs and rights, but let's please, maybe for just one time, start with our own people and their safety. Like Rabbi Wolpe reminded us yesterday, loving your own family first and most is a virtue, not a prejudice. And our Jewish family needs our love and support. We know now more than ever before that even in 2024, the Jewish people still need defending, still very much need the state of Israel. And if defense of Israel doesn't come from the people in our movement, I worry that it will in no time at all completely disappear from the American left. This is why the reform movement must be Zionist by conviction, not just by convenience. Meaning our support of Israel's right to exist and defend herself must come at all times, not just when we like her government and its leaders. Now, I know there are some of you who want to argue with me about a bunch of what I said, but let's start with what's the rest of the quote. Ukshani le'atzmi mani. If I am for myself alone, what am I? This is also an important question. It does not, however, mean we put others' needs above our own. It does not mean we need to negate our own identity, our own rights, our own history, our own safety. Instead, I would argue it's a call to find partners who will support and stand with us. We are in a world that feels crazy, living in times that feel insane. We find ourselves abandoned by those we've thought of long time as allies, and we should not give up on them. But I also think this second part of Hillel's question encourages us to find others to rely on, to realize it's also time to make new friends. Speaking of time, there is also a sense of urgency in this, for as you know, Hillel continues, V'im lo akshav im matai. Never in my lifetime has there been another moment when Israel felt so isolated, so broken, so vulnerable to me. The Jewish world needs to speak on its behalf, to defend itself, to live unapologetically, to celebrate our resilience and our ability to thrive. Indeed, it's time for our movement to make it clear that we fully support Israel's right to exist, and that even our critique of her government comes from love and a hope for what Israel can be, and not a denial of Israel's rights. So how do we do this? First and foremost, I believe we need to redefine Reform Zionism, no longer stating that we simply accept Zionism's foundational aim, which is what it currently states on reformjudaism.org. But instead, we need to reframe our Zionism as one dedicated to the celebration and flourishing of our people in our homeland. And with that, we need to lean in to finding partners in Israel so we may uplift the voices of our movement, to find moments and causes to celebrate, and most importantly, to ensure that even when we struggle with Israeli policy or leadership, we will never lend our voices to the angry mob that seeks to destroy us. Never engage in a boxing match, attempting a knockout. Instead, as Jacob did with Adonai, we will wrestle while intimately embracing, as is the legacy of the name Yisrael. Now, I believe the work should begin with our movement's institutional pillars, HUC, CCAR, and the URJ. And it starts with all three making clear and unequivocal statements that we believe deeply in Israel, her right to exist as a Jewish state and her right to defend herself, without any kind of apology or equivocation, because our right to exist should have no caveats and no stipulations. Additionally, because I believe we need more than just ideas, we need action, I'm also happy to announce the creation of Mili, an initiative created to support Reform rabbis in teaching, preaching, and leading with this new Reform Zionism, one that prioritizes Achavat Yisrael and believes Reform Judaism is and must remain inextricably linked with Jewish peoplehood in Israel, one that does not accept anti-Zionism as a legitimate option for leaders of our movement, and one that proudly recognizes, as Rabbi Hirsch reminded us yesterday, that principles require parameters and beliefs require boundaries. Oh, thank you, those were his words, not mine. This future of Reform Zionism must also be one that strives to ensure that Israel is kept at the center of our lives. I've heard people talking about the feeling at this conference that it's nice to be somewhere where you feel validated and supported in your love of Israel. Mili seeks to create that feeling all year long, and we're starting with a free password-protected resource offering several benefits to those who sign up, including a list of vetted Israel speakers, an easily adaptable monthly Israel email that rabbis can personalize and share with their communities, information about different Israeli organizations to highlight, discounts to rabbis who wish to improve their modern Hebrew through a partnership with Ulpan Or, a virtual resource bank of Israel lesson plans for all ages, Israel-related sermons and liturgical inserts, suggested content for social media, webinars starting this very summer to help us prepare for our High Holy Day preaching, and a phone a friend list of Reform Zionist rabbis willing to talk to colleagues about their Israel-related content, resources, struggles, and ideas. This is still very new. Thank you. This is still very new, but if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you, listen to it, it's a complicated one, to go to tinyurl.com/millirabbis. That's M-I-L-I. I'll say it again, tinyurl.com/millirabbis. Or, I think I had it somewhere, you can scan that beautiful postcard that was in your swag bags. If you were wondering what that was about, go ahead and find those postcards and scan those. And I just want to take a minute to say, I know that it's a little crazy that some random rabbis from Boca Raton are putting this together. We would love it if someday this was in close partnership with the union. Honestly, I'm enthusiastic about the upcoming work of the new URJ, CCAR, ARTSA, Rabbinic Cabinet and its growing initiatives. But until the time our institutions are willing and able to offer these necessary resources themselves, and most importantly, until the moment comes when our movement's positions are clear that we fully support the Zionist dream and work, we will be running it through Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, because both Rabbi Ronnie Keller and I believe deeply in its importance, and because we feel we're being called by Hillel's questions. So we're acting now because im lo akshav matai, and we hope you too will join us. Kishani le'atzmi ma'ani. But we're creating what we feel we need for the Zionist future because Zionism is a centerpiece of Jewish identity, because it's time for Reform Judaism to fully and publicly embrace Israel, and because we genuinely believe im ein ani li, mi li. Thank you.
Tzoraim tovim. Thank you so much. We have so much to think about and so much to do. I'm so grateful for this opportunity now, a second year in a row, for us to gather and do a kind of cheshbon nefesh, right? A necessary critique of where we are and where we aren't. I do want to suggest, however, and it's good that our talks are placed close together, that perhaps it's not an either or, that perhaps there's a false dichotomy, that perhaps in the tension of our internal critique and our work to find more partners and build collaborations, that perhaps it not be an either or. Perhaps truly in that false dichotomy we can find a new Zionism for Reform Judaism, and perhaps we are in a new phase of a pious reform Zionism for a new era. We need something different. But before I get to the core of what I want to say, I want to express here how much I feel the absence of our beloved teachers and colleagues, rabbis, professors David Ellenson, Zichrono Livracha, and Aaron Pankin, Zichrono Livracha. Without their leadership and their brilliance, I feel that more of us need to step forward and search and think perhaps even more deeply. And before I get to the core of what I want to say, I also want to stress that I speak both as an American rabbi and as an Israeli wife and mother. Yes, I know that our 2 young sons may find themselves too soon fighting the children of the terrorists that Israel must fight today. And yes, like many of you, I've had a chance, thanks to Makor, to go on a solidarity mission to Israel after October 7th, yes, to bring duffels upon duffels of supplies and connect to the families of the hostages, and to visit Kfar Aza, where one of our relatives escaped from that horror quite miraculously, and yes, to pick kohlrabi, and at one point we needed to lie on the ground and cover our heads because there were missiles incoming right over our heads that were intercepted thanks to the Iron Dome. And one of our cousins was severely injured with a bullet to his head defending Kibbutz Erez. He lost many of his friends, but in that one place, no terrorist entered their kibbutz. And of course, as I speak, I hold literally close to my heart all of the hostages with whom many of us are so deeply connected on day 237. At home in Baltimore, every single Sunday morning at our congregation, dozens of people gather together from across a remarkably broad spectrum of Jewish life for what many of you may know is #RunForTheirLives. I don't know if any of your communities are engaged in it, but we are just one of 175 communities around the world who every Sunday gather together to recite the names of the hostages. And every Sunday morning when I awake our sons and insist that they come walk with us, I say to them, it's the least we can do. What a horrific moment we are in, and how blessed we are that in most cases we are able to do so in safety. I speak also in memory of Yanai Kaminka, one of the IDF officers who was killed on October 7th at his base defending his soldiers. Yanai, Zichrono Livracha, and our daughter Tehillah grew up together in our Reform congregation in Tzur Hadassah, right outside Jerusalem, where my husband, Rabbi Ofer Sabath Beit-Halachmi, was the rabbi for many years. I want to turn to our texts, a number of texts that I think should guide us as we create a new vision for this new moment. Yes, there is enormous dissonance and disappointment about our relationships with others who we thought held views similar to our own humanistic views that are based on our particularism, humanistic views that emerge from our tradition that I want to call forward for us at this time. We have to strengthen and build those relationships and transcend the dissonance and disappointment with an eye toward the long haul, with determination and deference to the best of our tradition and what God has expected of us since the very first Jew, Abraham, was chosen for a new mission, a mission clearly rooted in the land of Israel, a mission rooted also in universal ethics. I'll just turn to the texts in shorthand, imagining that most of you know them, and in fact, many of us have studied them together. The first I want to call to mind is God's response to Abraham in the Midrash, after Abraham, of course, famously argues with God to prevent any unnecessary collateral damage, any loss of innocent lives in Sodom and Gomorrah in their case. In the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, the conversation that's imagined there between God and Abraham is that the Holy One, blessed be God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says to Abraham, "Aha, I have seen that you love justice. You love to justify and defend all my creatures. You hate the fact that anything terrible should happen to an innocent human being. The human beings in Sodom and Gomorrah were surely not Jews, and yet Abraham is rising to defend them, to protect them." And then in the Midrash, I'm not making this up, God says to Abraham, "Aha, that is why I chose you, because I knew that you would have inside you." The first Jew had to have inside him, and we must have inside ourselves. Not only, of course, Mili, but the idea that we are responsible for all of humanity, and God save us if we become numb to that responsibility. The desolation of Sodom and Gomorrah was not for us simply collateral damage, but rather a test of whether or not God's choice of Abraham, God's choice of us, was the right choice. A second and related text that you know well is, of course, the text that we just sang about at Passover and we sing parts of every day, which is singing about our freedom having crossed the sea. We are, of course, about our own survival. It's a core ethical obligation to stand and kill one who is coming to kill you. That is a core ethical obligation. But should we really sing about the Egyptians drowning in the sea? It was only this year that I noticed that actually, God's complaint is not that the Israelites are singing about their hard-won freedom, but God is criticizing the angels on high, that a higher level of existence cannot possibly sing when God's creatures are drowning. And so when I think about the sources for a new Reform Zionism for our time, I think also about what Martin Buber called Hebrew humanism. It was his idea, against other Zionist thought, that if Zionism is only about nationalism, it will surely perish. By opposing, he writes, Hebrew humanism to a nationalism which is nothing but empty self-assertion, I wish to indicate that at this juncture, the Zionist movement, and I believe we are at that juncture, must decide either for national egoism or national humanism. Buber writes, if it decides in favor of national egoism, it too will suffer the fate which will soon befall all shallow nationalism. That is, nationalism which does not set the nation on a true, superior mission. If it decides in favor of Hebrew humanism, it will be strong and effective long after shallow nationalism has lost all meaning and justification, because as we want for Israel today and as we want for our Zionism as Reformed Jews, we want it to have something to say, something to bring and to give to all of humankind. So we cannot only be concerned, even in these horrific moments, about our own survival. If we don't have moral concern and strive to protect the innocent and hold Israel and ourselves accountable, I shudder to think about who we will have become. And so I think of our dead friends, the mother of Yanai Kaminka, and all our colleagues at Rabbis for Human Rights and other organizations who, despite their mourning, their outrage, their terror, they have redoubled their efforts to focus on the long game. Ilana Kaminka, the mother of Yanai, has only increased her activism for dialogue and peace, even in the midst of that unbearable sorrow, rage in the face of that evil barbarism of Hamas that inflicted and continues to inflict horrors on our people on and since October 7th. Ilana and so many of our friends keep their focus on the values of Judaism and on the long game for Israel and a future that is still possible. They need our partnership as well. She and most Israelis are struggling but are prepared to continue and to risk their lives for a future that we must be committed to as well. I want to conclude by quoting how Heschel once recited a famous text about standing at Sinai. When Israel approached Sinai, you all probably know this text. God lifted up the mountain and held it over their heads, saying, "If you accept this Torah," Mutav says, "V'im lav sham tehei kvuratchem," and if not, here will be your grave. Heschel says, he ends that famous talk called The Meaning of This Hour. I ask the question now, what is the meaning of this hour? He concludes by saying, "The mountain of history is over our heads again. Shall we renew the covenant with God?" Friends, the mountain of history is indeed over our heads again. And now there are three questions we must ask ourselves as individuals and as a movement. Can we still renew our covenant with God, who demands that we are concerned for all creatures? Can we renew our covenant not just with our people, but with all of humanity, despite what we are facing? And can we, and will we, with these values intact, still renew our covenant with the land, the state of Israel, both as it is, and I pray, as we dream it can still be? Thank you.
It is an honor to be speaking with you today about my vision for the future of Reform Judaism. I grew up in Stephen Wise and have proudly stood at this bima during many of my own important milestones, including my graduation from the Early Childhood Center, bat mitzvah, and high school graduation. My vision for the future would emphasize inclusion and a willingness to ask questions and find answers, qualities that I learned very early at Stephen Wise. As an example, I will never forget when I was 3 years old and we had our first special friends lunch. On this occasion, I was permitted to invite anyone to join me for lunch. While most of my classmates chose their grandparents and my own grandparents were eagerly awaiting my invitation, I invited Jose Fernandez, the synagogue's head of maintenance. To me, Jose was essential in making this house of worship a home. And I still remember how proud and important I felt wearing my favorite dress as I gave Jose a bunch of pink flowers and welcomed him to my classroom and sanctuary. While I'm well past my early childhood center years, having finished my junior year at Vanderbilt, the actions that I took as a small child reflect those we should be taking as a community. During college, I have made friends of various backgrounds. I often invite my non-Jewish friends to Shabbat dinners or Jewish events. and I love to attend other cultural and religious events with my friends to learn about their backgrounds. While this often comes naturally to me, I've noticed that it feels more difficult after October 7th because of preconceived notions about identity. However, it is more important to form friendships across preconceived notions of difference right now. If we do not, we miss learning about others' experiences and backgrounds and teaching them about our own. The future of Reform Judaism involves not only inclusion, but actively seeking opportunities that might be uncomfortable. Since October 7th, I've noticed that many of my Jewish peers stick together in controlled settings that feel insular and cliquey. Yet we need to confront the outside world and engage with those not from Jewish backgrounds. This might mean joining groups where there are no other Jews present. If we do not branch out and expand our circles, we lose out and risk not teaching what might need to be taught. I'm no stranger to discomfort, having been part of domestic and international dialogue through Seeds of Peace, an organization that hopes to bridge communities through difference and dialogue. Following my freshman year at Vanderbilt University, in the summer of 2022, I participated in conversations on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I still remember how some of the remarks and comments made during the program made me so uncomfortable that I questioned whether to stay in the room. I remember when one of the participants shared that Israel was causing ethnic genocide and that the US should not be providing funding to Israel. After this dialogue session, I spoke with an Israeli Seed who reaffirmed my feelings and emotions. The moments and comments that make us uncomfortable are the ones in which being present and part of the conversation is most important. If we leave the room and stay in our comfort zones, we do not have the chance to share our voices and achieve growth. We cannot push the conversation forward and explain anti-Semitism when we are not there. Similarly, it is important to listen to understand. To have dialogue, we need to enter spaces where we are fully willing to acknowledge our identities and backgrounds. Yet during any dialogue, we should ensure that we are educated on facts and history. At Seeds of Peace, we often spoke about the comfort, stretch, and panic zones. After October 7th, the future of Reform Judaism must focus on placing ourselves in the stretch and panic zones, despite how terrifying it can feel. At Vanderbilt, I've taken it upon myself to continue this trend of stepping into unknown and uncharted territory. I'm a believer in keeping myself in the stretch and panic zones, yet I'm still part of communities that provide a comfort zone. I joined the Interfaith Scholars Program and am on the Student Advisory Board of the Vanderbilt Project on Unity and American Democracy. Through these programs, I've had difficult conversations and engaged with peers who come from different religions, races, ethnicities, and socioeconomic statuses. This spring, amidst chaos circulating from an encampment on campus and students protesting for a BDS referendum, I was fortunate to attend sessions with Dr. Salam Fayyad, the former Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, and Ambassador Michael Herzog, Israel's ambassador to the United States. Through speaking with both individuals, I was able to continue learning about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as about the Israel-Hamas war. Every person and group has a story, but how we share our story is important. I was recently in Europe, where I educated myself on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. At Schindler's Factory in Krakow, Poland, my guide struck me as an unreliable narrator on certain points, so I did my own learning by heading to the Krakow JCC and asking questions. In doing so, I met the CEO, Jonathan Ornstein, and had Shabbat dinner with the community. I also made a new friend who is a non-Jewish college student. And throughout Shabbat dinner, we shared stories about our campuses and our experiences. I opened up with her about the rise of anti-Semitism on US college campuses, and I learned about her experience getting involved with Israeli humanitarian organizations. My own Jewish journey has not been linear, but as a result, I have been able to question and branch out of my environment. I am grateful to Stephen Wise's religious school for allowing me to cultivate my own growth. While I participated in religious school at Stephen Wise, I was also granted permission to participate in Jewish Journey Project through the JCC. Jewish Journey Project allowed me to take different classes and learn about Judaism in non-traditional ways, such as through music and art. We must encourage Jewish students to take chances and become involved with Judaism in ways other than religious school, especially during the teenage years. Following my bat mitzvah, I participated with Stand With Us, Tikva, the Jewish Women's Archive Rising Voices Fellowship, and APAC to keep having my questions answered and understand my own identity. There is often a disconnect between the bar and bat mitzvah years and the college years due to the focus on religious school and the lack of subsequent programs available within a given synagogue. This gap should be alleviated so students can stay involved with their synagogues, communities, and broader faith. Perhaps we could construct an individualized education plan for every young person. We should fill in the holes and teach students about Zionism, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and what it means to be a Jewish student on a college campus and in the workplace. But we must also allow young people to think for themselves and ultimately come to their own conclusions that there's no place like home. We must be transparent about the isolating climate many Jews across America face right now. To be honest, during the past year, I've sometimes felt stuck. Earlier this month, I stood before the new synagogue in Berlin, Germany, and viewed the photos of the hostages, photos that I witness on a daily basis in New York City and on social media. As I viewed the past and the present, I looked to my right and saw the word Kadima written on the building. I thought about how Rabbi Hirsch often tells us that the Jews are a hopeful people, and I'm hopeful that we can find a way to move forward. Thank you.
To the credit of the organizers, I thought the plenaries yesterday and today were so insightful and challenged my own thinking. And this morning at 3:30, when I couldn't sleep with jet lag and was rewriting everything I had planned to say, I was looking for something around which to organize my thoughts. And I found something that I wrote 11 years ago for the URJ biennial while I was serving as NIFTY president. And a wise rabbi at that biennial told me it's easier to get a new audience than a new speech. So here we go. This January, a month after I made Aliyah, I had a conversation with a friend of mine that I think about almost daily. We both grew up in NIFTY, attended URJ congregations and summer camps, went to large private universities, and visited Israel many times on an assortment of programs. However, our Jewish values and experiences led us down different paths as it relates to Israel. She told me that young Jews are categorically moving away from Israel, claiming that it has no place in modern Jewish theology, and that Jewish organizations must adapt or be left behind. Just yesterday, when the conference broke for lunch, I walked out of the synagogue and two young people who I instantly recognized from NIFTY, one of whom was my camper at Kutz, flagged me down on 68th Street and handed me a stack of letters addressed to the leadership of the Reform movement. I read through them. The letters claim that we're too cozy with AIPAC, that their URJ synagogue religious school failed to talk about Palestinian suffering, that our movement supports ethnic cleansing, genocide, and crimes against humanity, and as one of the letters closes, Judaism is not Zionism, and Israel is not Judaism. It's easy to dismiss these opinions as minority, fringe, sensationalist, illogical, or self-righteous, but as we learn in the book of Numbers, even when it's painful, we must listen to what rebels can teach us. Before Moses struck the rock, he said in anger, "Listen here, you rebels." But the Hebrew doesn't say rebels, it says hamorim. Listen here, you teachers. As I watched the coverage of the encampments at Columbia and other universities, it was easy to zoom in on those that were misguided, light on the facts, unappreciative of history, and seemingly unaware of geography. But I also saw something else. I saw young people creating a sense of community around a common cause with elements of spirituality, music, leadership, mutuality, and a sense of purpose. The same elements that drew many of us in this room to NIFTY and camp and Reformed Jewish life at large. And over the last 10 plus years, I've seen friends and acquaintances from NIFTY and camp find their voice on Israel across the political spectrum. Some joined the anti-Zionist minyan in Jerusalem during their first year of HUC. Others organized for the Republican Jewish Coalition, protested outside 633 3rd Avenue that NIFTY didn't teach them about the occupation. People who love Bibi, who hate Bibi, who support BDS, who oppose BDS, see Israel as a colonialist project and think compromising with Palestinians is akin to negotiating with terrorists. Our movement has produced all of these people. Our movement has always been a wide tent. Historically, we have flip-flopped on our position on Zionism. Our movement's unity has never been defined by our uniformity. And if you've looked at the comment section on any statement our movement has put out on Israel, or any topic for that matter, you know what I'm talking about. And yet, in the last 8 months, I have watched many leaders of our movement narrow the aperture of what it means to be a Reformed Jew as defined by one's position on Israel or how they express that view. And regardless of my own personal viewpoints, the rebels in our midst are teaching us something, that similar experiences, similar values, similar facts don't always lead us to the same conclusions. And when I watch my peers come to different conclusions about Israel than I do find it disappointing. Sometimes it feels disingenuous, sometimes intellectually dishonest, privileged, and it's sometimes self-righteous. But what makes me truly upset is when I see my peers take their Reformed Jewish values and find community with groups and organizations who espouse anti-Semitic views or who blatantly use anti-Semitism to achieve their social justice agenda. When I see products of our movement decry the occupation, but do so in the company of left-wing groups that our own government has deemed as hate groups, instead of in solidarity with the thousands of Israelis who protest the occupation each Motzei Shabbat in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, I'm concerned. I'm similarly concerned when I see products of our movement lobby forcefully for the security of the state of Israel with right-wing politicians who welcome the electoral support of neo-Nazis, instead of in solidarity with liberal Israelis who appreciate where the politics of security end and the politics of racism start. I loved the comment this afternoon that we need to know Israel, but I think we also need to know Israelis as well. Community is the living laboratory where facts and ideas become beliefs and beliefs become identity. The Reform movement is not losing the battle of facts. The facts are usually on our side. We are, however, losing the battle of community. We are shocked when 18-year-old products of our movement are drawn in by campus communities who speak fluently the language of Tikkun Olam, youth empowerment, and universalism, only to then convert them to extremist and maximalist positions on both the right and the left. But what communal alternative have we provided? The boundaries of community have profoundly shifted. Community for today's young people is decentralized, it's agile, it straddles the physical and the virtual realm, and we aren't keeping pace. And in many respects, we are being crushed under the weight of our own systems, structures, and organizations. And today's young people, as evidenced in these letters, are voting with their feet. And that part I wrote verbatim 11 years ago, and I still feel that way, but the stakes feel immensely higher today. In today's world, language is important, and there is an obviously increasing division between what I would call Israel Jews and non-Israel Jews. I use these terms because not all non-Israel Jews are anti-Zionists. Most aren't. And not all Israel Jews are ardent Zionists. Most aren't. Most are, to use a political campaigning term, eavesdroppers on the Israel conversation, rather than active participants in it. Most are allergic to radical viewpoints, the ones that are being sensationalized by the news and being prioritized by social media algorithms. So what does it mean to recharge Reform Judaism in this moment? The seemingly obvious thing to do would be to clarify our positions, to dig in on our narrative, let the world know where we stand and where we don't stand. And maybe we do need to do a bit more of that. But my vision for our movement is not that it derives its progressive nature from its positions on issues or current events, or positions on a government or the ministers of a government, but rather its ability to aggressively and passionately reclaim the center. The most progressive thing that we can do as a religious movement in times of deep and ugly division, like the times that we're living in now, is to give a platform, a voice, and most importantly, a religious community to the vast silent majority of Jews around the world who aren't secular but aren't Orthodox, who aren't ardent Zionists but definitely aren't anti-Zionists. And I will admit there are plenty of my peers who we have lost, and for whom nothing our movement does or will do will be sufficient. But I do think we stand a chance at preventing that group from growing. And I'd like to close by offering 4 seemingly obvious organizing principles for our community to work towards that end, things that require active practice. 1, strong opinions are fine. We have a lot of them in the Jewish world, but hold them loosely. Part of practicing pluralism is regularly interrogating our own positions on issues, encouraging others to do the same, and making room for clarifying or complicating our own thinking. Number 2, none of us hold the monopoly on truth, and we as a movement can hold and engage with dual and often dueling narratives without discounting them. 3rd, make room for both facts and factfulness. And when you think someone else might not have all the facts, especially when it crosses a generational line, offer those facts generously and genuinely to further conversation rather than stifle it. And lastly, reject binaries and oversimplifications. These are the tactics of extremists and not pluralists. We must be the movement that holds and shows up confidently with complexity and nuance and inspires others to do the same. I would not suggest for a minute that our movement change or walk away from its formal position on Zionism. Far from it. But I do think that we must reclaim and make more accessible what it means to be Zionist through deeds and not just words. Zionism that is a religious Zionism for the modern world and for modern Jews. Because if we don't, who will? Thank you.
At the risk of everything's been said but not yet by everyone, I will again, thank you, Andrew. It's really an honor to be with this illustrious group of leaders, and thank you, Ami and Tracy and Mark, for everyone for hosting this conversation and for inviting me to be a part of it. It's hard to think of the future when there are people in captivity. It's hard to stand here in the free world and we walk out and go out into the streets in the hustle and bustle of life, and there are people who are sitting in a dungeon in Gaza now, not knowing what the future will hold for them. And that's why on this Sunday, when hundreds, thousands, maybe even more will gather just down the street on Fifth Avenue to march for Israel, we as the Reform Movement made the decision that we will be joining the Hostage Family Forum to march together and to remind the world what the Rambam taught us as the greatest mitzvah, or no greater mitzvah than Pidyon Shvu'im, than redeeming of the captives. Because we all know that October 7th changed our world forever. We all know that on that Shabbat, that Simchat Torah, when we woke up to alerts to the surreal becoming reality, our lives were forevermore changed. Now, for some, it upended the very ground on which they stood. And for some, it caused them to dig in their heels with a greater resolve in what they already believed and felt. How many of you received a torrent of text messages, emails, phone calls, WhatsApps, asking you questions about what's going on? Anybody? Come on. Yeah. In reflecting upon those questions I got, the simple question was, how are you? To which there really was no answer, except for, Ani kishlom ami, I am as my people are. To chutzpahdik questions, as I would call them, saying, can you just explain to me a brief history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by text message? Some saying, see, I told you so. See, I told you that the situation was untenable. Occupation for 57 years, the lack of a Palestinian state. See, you knew this was going to happen. And some said, see, I told you so. I told you so. We'll never make peace with them. This is the true manifestation of what they've wanted to have happen all over. They want to kill Jews, not only in Israel, but all over the world. And it's not just Hamas, but the Iranian proxies, the Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis all over. This is a geopolitical conspiracy, an attempt to eradicate the Jewish people. To which I cried with one simple word, Nachon, correct. And in December, we received 2 letters that I think, Ami, you mentioned earlier yesterday, of members of those Reform Jews who grew up in our movements, some literally our children, who said, we are mishpacha, but rather than calling you on the phone, I'm going to make a public display of what I think you should do. And in our invitation for a phone call and a Zoom chat, we said, as nice, polite Americans, we said, let's agree to disagree. But then a 3rd letter came in. And a 3rd letter came in, signed by a handful of individuals, also in their 20s, also who have grown up in the Reform movement, who said to us the following. He said, we saw those letters circling around on the net, and we were approached by many to sign, but we wanted to let you know, you, the leadership of the Reform movement, we wanted to let you know that those letters, they don't really reflect us. Those people don't necessarily represent our cohort and many hundreds and thousands more who chose not to sign, who opted out of that message. You see, we are Zionists. We are liberal Zionists. We grew up in the Reform movement and we adhere deeply to the messages of social justice, of tikkun olam, to see everyone in B'Tselem Elohim, and I could list all the psukim cliches that we use now with great regularity. And they said, we wanted to reach out because we want to do something, and we want to, first of all, let you know that there are other views out there. We're not necessarily activists. You see, we're accountants and lawyers, and we have day jobs. And we're trying to figure this out. Can you help us? And we entered into a conversation. They said, well, what does it mean to be a Reform Zionist in your opinion? And here's what I began to tell them. I said, first of all, we have to see the duality of the state of Israel. And that it has both a guf and a neshama, both a body and a soul. And sometimes it's our job as Zionists to emphasize more the need to protect our body, our physicality, our lives. And sometimes we also have to worry about our soul. And this moment requires both. I said, you see, as American Reform Zionists, let's imagine, first of all, that we have a responsibility to uphold that U.S.-Israel relationship. We have a responsibility to speak to our elected officials, from the city council member up until the President of the United States. We have an obligation to thank them when they uphold our values. And we have an obligation to speak truth to that power when we feel that they don't. But also as Jews, we have that intra-Jewish conversation where we also need to speak to Israelis. And when we have to say that what happens in Israel deeply affects us here around the world. But I said, being a Zionist is not about those high-level political conversations. Being a Zionist is an identity. Being a Zionist is about literacy. Being a Zionist is making sure that you are well-versed in your collective narrative and that you speak the language of the Jewish people. I said, let's imagine for a second that when each Reformed Jew wakes up and walks out on their proverbial stoop to pick up their New York Times or Wall Street Journal or Washington Post or whatever, that they also pick up Yediot Achronot or Haaretz in Hebrew and can have that language, that fluency, that ability to have that conversation. I said, imagine for a second that every single Reformed Jew had spent a semester or a year in Israel in their formative teen or early adult years. How would that play out for us now? What would that look like? How would that impact the leadership of our movement and the leadership of the broader North American Jewish community? That's what we can make happen. And I said, yes, Zionism is actually about politics because politics is the manifestation, the implementation, and even the translation of our values into policy. And our values are the same here in Washington, D.C. as they are in Jerusalem. And we as Reformed Jews, as Reformed Zionists, we're here to advocate that not only are we to be Lihyot Am Chofshi Be'artzenu, to be a free people in our land, but to uphold the values laid out for us in Israel's Megillat HaAtzmaut of Cherut, Tzedek, V'Shalom, of freedom, justice, and peace. And while I have many rabbis, I really only have one Rebbe. And that is, of course, Ami, the late, great Rabbi Dick Hirsch, Alav Shalom, who would always invite me into his office in Beit Shmuel or in the Jewish Agency building and remember every detail of my family and ask me about my trajectory and my career. And he would slam his fist on the table and grab me by the shirt and say, Josh, you have to understand Zionism is a social justice movement. And he said, see, it's right here. Right here in the book of Devarim, book of Deuteronomy, where it says, you all know the pasuk, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And he goes, but Reformed Jews, he goes, they don't read the Bible enough, he said. What's the second half of the pasuk? And then he said, Leman techiyeh v'yarashta et haaretz asher ani Adonai Elohecha noten lach. So that you should live and inherit the land that the Lord your God has given you. He said, you can't detach the second half from the first half. All right. He would say, our inheritance of the land, our presence here in the land is in fact conditional upon establishing a just society. And that's why we roll up our hands and sometimes get dirty in the world of politics. And that's why those of us, and I'm looking at you in the room who are with me, that's why we sit around the table at the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency and Keret Kayemet L'Yisrael and spend time doing the rounds in the Knesset. Not because it's fun. It's frustrating. And it's hard. But we do it because it matters. We do it because the stakes, as Andrew, you also said, the stakes are incredibly high right now. We do it because if we weren't there, we know it would be much worse. So I told this young 27-year-old lawyer, I shared with him a teaching from my other teacher. I said that the Jewish people have returned to history with a degree of power, a power unknown for the previous 2 millennium. The Reform Zionism needs to know and affirm the religious significance of this fact. The monism of universalism must be rejected, and our Zionism must be built upon the dialectical foundations of universalism and particularism and the interplay between them. Both poles must be accorded religious legitimacy by our movement. For only then can a platform be constructed in which each can inform and at times provide a corrective for the other. In so doing, a new our Reform Zionism will be established, in the words of Rabbi Professor David Ellenson. My vision for Reform Zionism is to create an enduring partnership between Israel and the diaspora, one grounded in mutual responsibility and shared destiny. But we must not see our Zionism, as the great scholar Shimon Ravidovich wrote, as a one-sided obligation. Each must mutually recognize the other. The diaspora of Israel must build the state of Israel with all its strength, and the state of Israel must recognize the diaspora as equal value and an equally responsible co-builder and co-creator of all Jewish life. That's our mission. And together, let us pray for an or chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, v'nizke kulanu mehira le'oro. May there be a new light on Zion, and may all of us merit quickly from that light. Toda Rabba.
Six inspired visions by truly 6 extraordinary leaders. In the best of times, at times of peace without war, at times when there are no hostages, at times when we're all not suffering trauma, envisioning the future is a challenging endeavor. Our rabbis teach that one of the fundamental features of Jewish spirituality is that we cannot predict the future when it comes to human beings. We can't predict the future, but as Rabbi Wolpe reminded us yesterday, we can make the future. The script has not yet been written. The future is radically open. Our thanks to our 6 teachers this afternoon for setting the table for us. Now, it is up to all of us to make their visions a reality. Please join me in thanking our presenters this afternoon.